facts are what they are, but the stories we spin around the facts, that's what makes the difference. If you paid any attention at all, and you couldn't help but pay attention back a couple weeks ago when the election was coming to its culmination, and all those crazy ads were running on every television channel and all over the place, you heard all kinds of stories. The facts supposedly were fairly well nailed down, at least some people thought they were, but the spin that people put on the facts was what was going to make the campaign. Remember, 2 years ago, the people who seemed to be able to put the best spin on things, the people who had the best story, 2 years ago, apparently were the Democrats. They won. And then this last election, 2 years later, apparently the people who could put the best spin on things, who had the best story to tell, were the Republicans. And so the Republicans won a whole bunch of this last election. The facts didn't change much from then until now, and they probably won't change a whole lot from now until 2 years from now when we do it all over again. The facts didn't change a whole lot, but the stories sure changed. The facts matter, but what really matters are the stories. The stories are where the meaning lies. The stories are where the passion lies. The stories are where the vigor lies. And so the stories are what really matter. Twice over the course of my ministry so far, I have been pastor to congregations that have moved. They used to worship over there in a building way over yonder, but through a variety of circumstances, they ended up leaving that building, sold it, tore it down, whatever, and moved over here. And now, for some time, they have been worshiping over here in this building. And everybody you talk to will say the move was necessary. There was some fundamental problem with that building over there. Maybe it was falling down around their heads, or maybe the town and the neighborhood, whatever, had changed. Things had happened that made it necessary to move from that building to this building. And everybody knew that. Everybody understood that. But when I would sit down with people to talk, and this was mostly people old enough, maybe my parents' age or a little older than that, people who had sort of gone past their prime and whose life and whose vigor are sort of on the downside now. Maybe they were in a nursing home or they were shut in or whatever. I would sit down with them as we were getting acquainted. I would ask them to tell me stories about their life in the church. Tell me stories. And I learned to listen because pretty quick I caught a trend. All of the stories I heard were stories from that building over there. And there were almost never, for that generation of people, my parents' age and older, there were almost never stories about what happened in this building. It was always in that building. Because, you see, that was where I was confirmed. That is where I was married. That is where my children were baptized. That maybe even was where I buried my spouse from or my partner from. So everything that really mattered to me is somehow tied to that building. That's where all the stories were for people from that generation. And without the stories, the building is just a building. This Jerusalem temple, Jesus and the disciples and those who were following him at that moment were outside the temple where they could look down and see the temple and in the city and view its wonder. And it really was an awesome and imposing building. It was beautiful. It was costly. There were all kinds of obvious physical, visual reasons to be impressed by it. It was an amazing building. But you know and I know that its beauty was far deeper than that. It was the holy place. It was the place where God is worshipped. But even that gets a little bit tricky. You all know people who can worship God really well out on the golf course or up in the deer stand. So you can worship God anywhere, you know that. But something special was tied to that building. When the disciples entered that holy building, something special happened. When they entered that building, they suddenly found themselves surrounded by this huge history. All of those stories that you and I read about in what we call the Old Testament, all of those Bible stories that define them, stories about Abraham and Moses and King David and Isaiah and Jeremiah, all of those wonderful and powerful and deep stories suddenly surrounded them, those layers and layers of rich tradition. Suddenly, when they went into that building, they found themselves in the center of their universe. The building was the symbol for all of those stories that made them who they were. Stories about the people of God. So when Jesus said, this temple is going to be thrown down, there will not be left one stone upon another, you can understand why they were upset. You and I would be upset. An analogous situation perhaps is if for some horrible reason the terrorists would have been able to have bombed the White House that day or bombed the Capitol building. They're just buildings, aren't they? The president could live somewhere else. Congress could meet somewhere else. In fact, at various points in our history, the president and the Congress have been somewhere else. But you and I also know something else about those buildings. If you attack the White House, if you attack the Capitol building, you are attacking the very heart of our nation. If you attack those buildings, you're not just attacking brick and mortar. If you attack those buildings, you are attacking our national identity. You are attacking our national history. You are attacking the meaning of what it means to be a citizen of the United States of America. You are attacking our future. You know that, and I know that. So we understand the tension in the text. If the temple comes down, the world falls apart. If the temple comes down, it will be a catastrophic collapse. Jesus goes on to say exactly that. He said, as this all happens, there will be false prophets telling false stories. There's the story thing again. There will be false prophets telling false stories. There will be wars and insurrections and earthquakes and famines. Nations will rise up against nations. Persecution, betrayals, hatred, martyrdom. That stuff can kill a story. That stuff can kill a story. Whatever you used to believe about yourself, whatever you used to believe about your people, whatever you used to believe about your God, that stuff can kill it. Anybody here know what I'm talking about? Anybody here know about stories being killed? You had this story about your life once. Once upon a time, you had this story about your life and how it would go. How it would go for you, for your family, for your career. And then came the divorce, the diagnosis, or the downturn, or the disaster, or the death of a loved one. And it pretty well killed the story. The story that told you who you are. The story that gave your life meaning. The story that gave you vigor. The story that gave you purpose. You can't tell that story anymore because it got killed. It is no longer a source of life. It is no longer a source of hope. It is no longer a source of direction. It no longer tells the truth about you. You don't live there anymore. That's a problem. It's a problem because we need a story in which to live. The stories are where we live. If you're going to live, you've got to have a story. Tony Robinson. Do any of you get the Still Speaking devotionals, the little email devotionals that come as a part of the Still Speaking campaign? Wonderful devotionals written by a variety of people, one of them being Tony Robinson. He wrote the one for November 2nd, Election Day. And he was talking about Election Day in this little devotional. And he was talking about all the stories that the candidates were telling all over the country. It wasn't just Illinois that was having all this crazy stuff. All of these stories that the candidates told, most of the stories at least partly false, or partly twisted, or partly distorted. And as he reflected on that, he said, and I quote him, "True prophets and good leaders give people a better story to live in. A true prophet and a good leader give people a better story to live in." A better story? What's that? What is there a story? What story is there that you can stick with as long as you live? Sticking with it, a story you can stick with. That's what we're talking about here, a story you can stick to. There's one word, a Greek word, in that last verse in today's gospel reading. Hypomone. Any Greek scholars here? So I can tell you whatever I want to here. I'll tell you the truth. I'll tell you the truth. You can look the word up, and there's a variety of Bible language dictionaries that would let you look the word up. Or if you don't have access to them, here's simple way. You can take that last verse in today's gospel reading, by your hupomone, you will gain your souls. And you can lay out, I don't know, however many translations of the New Testament you can get your hands on, if you have a King James Bible and an RSV and a Living Bible, and whatever translation you've got, you can sort of stretch them out there and find this verse in each of them and read it, and you will read a variety of translations, all of them correct. You will read maybe the word patience. It's the one that King James used. You might find the word persistence. You might find the word faithfulness. You might find the word endurance. The Bible we read from this morning used the word endurance. I want to suggest another meaning. It isn't quite literal, but I think it's right. Maybe the word means sticking to the story. Sticking to the story. By sticking to the story, you will gain your soul. When everything blows up and all the old stories are killed, Jesus says, this will give you an opportunity to testify. When all the old stories are killed and died, Jesus said it will give you an opportunity to testify. Jesus said, I will give you words. I will give you words. What words? What words? I bet you know them already. Tell them the story of Jesus. Tell them the story of Jesus. Tell them the words that Jesus wrote on your heart. Tell them how Jesus came into this world to share everything that makes us human. Tell them how Jesus came into this world to share our joys and our sorrows and our trials and our tribulations. Tell them how Jesus told the truth about God. Tell them how Jesus told the truth about us. Tell them how Jesus revealed God's love and God's grace, even when some people found it offensive. Tell them how they tried to keep Jesus quiet. Tell them how finally they arrested Jesus. And they put him on trial in that kangaroo court. And they found him guilty of crimes he didn't commit. Tell them how they beat Jesus with whips and how they put that crown of thorns on his head until the blood ran down his face. Tell them how they stripped him naked, how they beat him with whips, how they made him carry his cross to Golgotha. Tell them how they nailed him to that cross and they strung him up and waited for him to die. Tell them how they put him in the tomb. And they rolled that big stone in front of the door. They put the imperial seal on the stone. And they posted a guard to make sure Jesus in the story stayed dead. But on the third day, you know where this is going, don't you? You experienced it yourself right there at that baptismal font. When you came to the font and the water touched you, you were joined with Jesus in his death. And in that moment, Jesus whispered the next piece of the story in your ear. You've known it from the day you were baptized. You know what happened on the third day. God raised him from the dead. Tell them that story. Tell them that story, my sisters and brothers. Tell that story and stick to it, because that's the story that changes everything. Tell that story and stick to it, because that's the story that makes you alive. Tell that story and stick to it, because that's the story that gives you your soul. Tell that story, my sisters and brothers. Stand right now and tell that story. Stand with me and tell the story. You know the words. You say them Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. You don't even need to look them up. Stand with me right now and tell the story. You know the words. Stand with me. Stand with me. I mean it. You know the words. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the power of the Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and buried. He descended to the dead. On the third day he rose again. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. Thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. That, my sisters and brothers, that is the story. That is the story that makes you alive. That's the story. Stick to it.